the difference between a dark moon and a black moon? Are the dark moon and the new moon the same? And what kinds of magic are best suited for the dark moon? Well, if you've had any of these questions or similar ones, you are in luck because tonight's episode is all about the magic of the dark moon. So, merry meet, I'm Aislin, this is Ask Aislin, and I'm here tonight talking about the dark moon. So, saying hello to those who are joining us live. Welcome, everyone. Make sure to say hi in the comments so we know that you are here. And if you are with us live, you can leave questions and comments in the chat, and we will have our usual Q&A at the end. And if you are also not with us live, you can also leave questions there. I go back through the feed later and I answer everyone's questions. So I'm going to go ahead and dive in because there is a lot to talk about tonight. And we already had kind of a off start to this episode, which I will talk about a little bit later. But the first thing I wanted to start with tonight is talking about some definitions. So the new moon is considered the first day of a lunar cycle. This is when the moon is between the earth and the sun. Now, this means that unless there is a solar eclipse or something is happening like that, some type of a solar eclipse, you will not be able to see the moon when it is new. Now, some people call the new moon and the dark moon the same thing. In reality, though, they have two different types of energies that are often utilized by witches and magical practitioners. And so, from the perspective of a witch, being able to look at these two phases of the lunar cycle in different ways can be especially important. And just pausing for a minute to say, Merry Meet, thank goodness I can see some of you. Kurt is here, and Misty, Merry Meet, and Cersei's here, and Shannon. Good to see you guys all. So we had a bad start to the video to begin with, and it wasn't feeding live, and I'm predicting a kind of a bad um, Mercury retrograde coming up in a couple of weeks. I'm just starting to see these like tech shifts, like are just like hiccups and stuff like this. So, but at least I can see some of you live, and I see Stephanie's here, and Chelsea also is here. So, merry meet everybody. So, so from the perspective of a witch, it can be useful to look at the energies of the dark moon and the new moon as separately because they can be utilized for different things. Now, if you want to know when the new moon is, you can simply look at a lunar calendar. You can find the exact time that the new moon is. I'm going to drop in the chat a lunar calendar that people can use. You will need to reset this, though. At the very top of it, you can put in your city. It's actually set for Los Angeles right now because that's where I am. And if you are watching back on YouTube later, you will find this link down in the comments as well. So you will be able to look and you can find the exact moment of the new moon. Now, if you want to calculate the dark moon, what you will do is you will look at that exact time. In this case, our new moon this month is at 4:44 p.m. on Thursday, February 27th, and I'll be talking a little bit more about the details of this coming new moon in just a moment, but you would then count backwards 24 hours, and you can consider that the start of the dark moon. Now, if you want to know when the balsamic moon starts, you would count back 3 days or 72 hours from the point of the new moon, and you'll have those 3 days prior to the new moon. That's what we call the balsamic moon. Now, I've talked about that in another episode. The energy of the balsamic moon is very similar to the energy of the dark moon. It just, the dark moon tends to feel a little bit more intense because we're sort of peaking that type of energy before we transition over into the new moon. Now, the new moon doesn't actually begin until the illumination of the moon is at about, like, sometimes people will say 0.1%, some people will say 0.2%, others will say up to 1%. They still consider the prior to that the dark moon. So the dark moon is essentially when we're at 0% illumination, and again, like I said, it precedes the dark moon. So this is how we would, precedes the new moon. So this is how we would figure out how to calculate the dark moon, because many calendars are not going to show that information to you. Now, no matter what definitions you use for the dark moon, at the end of all of it, the dark moon energy precedes the new moon energy. The energies have very different feels, but they also tend to overlap, which means it can be hard to tell when the dark moon has ended and the new moon has begun, at least from an energetic perspective. The dark moon is the most powerful point of releasing in the lunar cycle. So if you have something that you have been having trouble getting rid of, the dark moon can be a good time to do it. Now, any time during the waning half of the cycle is great for letting go, releasing, banishings. We're going to be talking about a lot of that later tonight. But if you have something that you're having trouble, that seems like it's stuck, a bad habit you can't erase, a person that you really need to let go of and you can't seem to let go of, I would recommend trying a magical working at the dark moon and see if that has any effect on your being able to let go in a more effective way. Now, as we release and we shed something, we make room for something new. And that is the energy of the new moon. So I think, and I'm sure you've heard me talk about this before, but I think a great analogy for the difference between a dark moon and a new moon is the idea of the menstrual cycle. So for those of you who do not have a menstrual cycle and never had one, sometimes the metaphor, the analogy doesn't quite make as much sense, but I think that you can at least understand what I'm talking about. And for those of you who do have a menstrual cycle or had one, then this will make a lot of sense to you. So during the menstrual cycle, we shed something, right? In this case, the uterine lining, but we shed much more than just that physical blood. We shed energy as well. And when we do so, we leave a purified womb, which has space for life to grow inside of it. Until that time, there isn't that space for it, right? And so if we kind of think about this analogy and we look at it as it relates to the dark and the new moon, it makes a lot of sense. So at the dark moon, we let go of the thing that is stagnant or stuck. So stagnant or stuck energy in your body is let go of in some way, or perhaps stagnant or stuck energy in your mind, right? Or in your emotions is shed, it's let go of, like a snake, right? Shedding its skin. And now, as we emerge into the new moon, we do so unfettered. We do so, without that thing that's holding us back. And just like the womb that is now purified and open and ready to receive life, we too are like that at the new moon. And our intentions can be as big or as wide as anything that you can imagine. But if we don't take that time to shed, we move from cycle to cycle carrying burdens, right? From one cycle to the next. And so if you are having trouble setting intentions at the start of a cycle, if you're having trouble kind of manifesting the things that you want, it's worth thinking about how much time do you spend releasing? Do you work with the dark moon at all? And if you don't, then it could be a good time to start, to try and see if that shifts things for you and makes it easier, for you to manifest what you want. So let us talk, before we get into kind of the magic of the dark moon, let's talk about this specific cycle. So for those of you who are watching this back, months from now, this won't make quite as much sense, and you will want to look up the times for your own, for the month that you are actually in. But for us right now, as I mentioned before, the new moon of this cycle takes place at 4:44 p.m. Pacific time on Thursday, February 27th. So if you are on the East Coast, that's going to be 7:44 p.m. and on to the 27th of February as well. And if you are anywhere in between the Eastern time zone and Pacific time zone, you'll have to figure that out for yourself too, but it's somewhere in between those two times. Now, it is very, very important that you look at a calendar in order to find the time of the new moon. Or if you are, and to check to make sure that that calendar is actually in your time zone. This also goes if you're getting information from sites on the web, or websites, right, or information from social media. You really want to make sure where that person is located, because different regions are going to have different times for the new moon. And so this can be especially important for like a new moon like this. So for example, if you are anywhere in North America, the new moon is going to be on the 27th of February. But if you are any place east of North America, so if you are in Europe, if you're in Asia, if you're in Africa, if you're anywhere east of that, the new moon is actually going to be on Friday, February 28th. So if you look at a source and it's from England and you think that the new moon is February 28th, you're not looking at it for your time zone if you are in North America. So I bring this up because about 99.9% of the people who follow this channel, because I have all the metrics, are from North America. And so I talk about time zones from here. But if you are from another place, you will want to look at the time zone, look at the information for your own time zone. Okay, so when it comes to the dark moon, the best way to kind of determine it is, again, to look at your lunar calendar. Like I said, you count backwards from the new moon 24 hours, and that will be the start of the dark moon. Now, it is important to note that it is not, this energy does not necessarily shift immediately. So what I find is that the dark moon and the new moon energies blend, and it all depends on where you are in your kind of state of like, are you ready to let go and move on to the next cycle? In which case that transition can happen very quickly. Or are you sort of like moving a little bit more slowly through the dark moon energy, which is totally normal, and there's not a right or wrong to this. But if that's the case, then you may even still feel like you are in the dark moon energy, even though the new moon has already happened. So for this reason, I say releasings anytime about 3 days before the new moon, you will feel like that is kind of a dark moon releasing. And anytime, even into 2 to 3 days after the new moon, you may still feel like you are in that dark moon energy and you may feel like releasing. But once you get to about 3 days past the new moon, you should start to feel the energy transition into the new moon energy for you specifically. And then from there, you can follow up any of that releasing you have done with your intention setting for the new cycle. All right, so let us talk about, because in the introduction, we talked about a black moon, so I do want to clear up some misunderstandings about the black moon versus the dark moon. So the black moon is not the same as a dark moon, and the black moon is not the same as a new moon. And you may hear people say that they're all the same, and sometimes people use the words interchangeably. But I will share with you some definitions of a black moon, and you'll see that these are actually not the same at all. So there is some disagreement in how we define a black moon. So the first definition that people will use is probably the most popular one, and this is that it is the second new moon in a calendar month. So this is kind of like a blue moon. So you've probably heard about a blue moon being the second full moon in a calendar month. So the black moon is the second new moon in a calendar month. And as I said, that's probably the most common definition. That's the definition that I use. It's probably the most common definition people use. Now, there is a second definition which says that a black moon is the second new moon in the same sign. So that would mean that the same solar month. So for example, if you have a new moon that is in Aries, and then the next new moon is also in Aries, you would call that second one a black moon. So that's a definition that's sometimes used. And then the third definition, which is the one that is accepted by NASA, this is more of like an astronomical definition, but it is one that a lot of people use, is that it is the third new moon in a season that has 4 new moons. Okay, so you'll see, I've seen memes and people posting about this as today's a black moon, and you have to be kind of clear on which definition you're using. And by today is a black moon, I don't mean today, I just mean a hypothetical post that I have seen. So for this particular year, we do have one of those black moons, which is called a seasonal black moon, where you have the third, it's considered the third new moon in a season that has 4 new moons, and the next one will occur on August 23rd, 2025. Okay, so you'll start to see posts, people will talk about that, and that is called a seasonal black moon. Okay, so I wanted to clear up all of those definitions so that we now move into the rest of the episode, which is about the dark moon. So we are talking about that 24 hours before the new moon. And the dark moon is especially great for releasing. Okay, so I'm just going to pause just to see comments because sometimes I'm having trouble with this feed. Okay, so I see a few more people have joined us. Tom is here. Hi, Tom, and Peggy, and Cindy's here. Tom says he loves the dark moon. I do too. And Cersei liked the analogy of the menstrual cycle. Yeah, it's the one that makes the most sense, of kind of letting go and then bringing in. Okay, so let us talk about the releasing energy of the dark moon. So the releasing energy is probably the most potent at the dark moon. And this is like a universal energy, which means that like your own individual energy may feel different. You may cycle differently. There's nothing right or wrong about that. But you may be at a certain part, like you may be at the full moon and you may feel like that's a time of release. And that is totally fine. And it's all up to where you are feeling energetically. I know that's definitely happened to me before. Sometimes full moons actually feel more like dark moons to me. But if we are talking about universal energy, the dark moon is the time of potent release. It is a time when some people feel a pull to turn inward, to contemplate. They may feel they get a little quieter. Sometimes that can start at the beginning of the waning crescent. So that would be 7 days before the new moon. That tends to amplify as we get closer and closer and closer to the dark moon. And as I mentioned earlier, the balsamic moon is the 3 days prior to the new moon. This is when people start to feel that energy kind of accelerating up to its peak when we hit the dark moon. This is also when a lot of people will experience spontaneous shadow work. So this is where just out of nowhere, you have insight into something that has troubled you for a long, long time. And all of a sudden, like sort of an aha moment out of the ether, you understand the answer to something that has plagued you for some time. And so sometimes at around this time of the lunar cycle, people start to have sort of those spontaneous moments of just sort of like almost um, tapping into the unconscious without even trying to, and having that sort of enlightenment. You may receive insights into you actually may also receive more insights from guides, from ancestors at that time, or even from your higher self, which is like essentially where what I think helps you connect to your unconscious in a lot of ways. So, depending on what comes up for you, you may also decide that it's a good time to let go of some of that as well. Um, so let us talk about that. Well, I guess for that reason, I really like to do some kind of a releasing ritual around that time. Just something that I want to let go of. And I will talk a little bit about my own personal practice. But let us dive into some magic for the dark moon. So, what are some things that a person can do during the dark moon? And here, as we're recording this live, it's Tuesday, February 25th. The dark moon for North America is tomorrow. And so you have a lot of ideas. You could start to kind of see where your energy is right now and see if any of these ideas sound good to you to try. So the first one is shadow work. So we've already kind of talked about having spontaneous shadow work moments, but this is also a good time to prompt shadow work. So shadow work is the process of facing the facing and acknowledging rejected parts of the self. It can be done with prompts or it can be done with exercises. So this is a good time to Google shadow work prompts, or if you have the Witch's Guide to Shadow Work, near the end of that offering, there is a list of prompts that you can use. You can use those prompts in order to stimulate sort of a shadow work session if you are not kind of just receiving that insight out of nowhere. Those who engage monthly in this type of kind of prompted shadow work, they tend to find that they have more spontaneous shadow work sessions. I don't do as much prompted shadow work as I used to because I've done so much of it. It's sort of like your brain kind of gets used to, okay, this is the kind of work we do at the end of the lunar cycle, and then you're more likely to kind of just have those insights, those moments without much prompting. But during a prompted or spontaneous session, like I mentioned earlier, it's like the insight will come to you In a lot of ways, this is because the veils thin slightly at the dark moon, and it allows it's pretty much because it's a transition period. It means that it's easier to contact, those who've crossed through the veils. It's a little bit easier to make that basically jump between the conscious mind and the unconscious mind, and that is why it seems that spontaneous shadow work sessions are more likely to happen at this time of the lunar cycle. Now, some people will call shadow work the surest path to enlightenment. I never like that extreme language like that, but I do very much believe that it is a very accessible path to enlightenment, and why it's one that many witches choose. Because I'm not going to say that it's easy to do, but there's a lot of information about it. There are a lot of groups doing it, and so it becomes very accessible. And there are more and more pagan and witch groups that are doing it as well. So and tailoring it to those who are on kind of that pagan or that witchcraft or that Wiccan path. So if you are, interested in learning more about shadow work and you do not have the Witch's Guide to Shadow Work yet, you can sign up for it. I'm going to drop the link in the chat right here. So when you sign up for that, it will send you the copy of the Witch's Guide to Shadow Work, and then you will be put on our mailing list. You can always cancel if you want to, but we send out, weekly emails that include the replays of these videos and just tips and things about witchcraft, shadow work, and energy work. Okay, so another thing that you can do during the dark moon, which is probably related to shadow work, is contemplation. So this is where you contemplate things that are working well in your life, things that are not working well. That's one of the things I really like to do. Is I had a teacher she did this exercise that was called cleaning your plate. And what you would do is every night, kind of as you're getting ready for bed, that's where I like to do it, kind of as I'm laying in bed. And you sort of reflect on the day and contemplate the day and sort of look at what worked well and look at the things that didn't work well. So for me, it's a lot of times it's about time, like wasting time or not utilizing time really well, not being efficient with my time. And so then I contemplate in what ways could I have improved that, right? And this isn't a way to be denigrating towards ourselves. It's not meant to make us feel bad. It's meant to help us improve ourselves so that we can become more like the person that we want to be. So that is one way of kind of thinking about contemplation. Carl Jung, often called the godfather of shadow work, he called this process active imagination. It's just really like reflection. It's about getting in a pretty restful state and just thinking about things. So think about a problem that you have. See if you can kind of remove the emotions from it so that you can, baby Corey just jumped out of the window, so that you can really work with that problem and not sort of become overcome or overwhelmed by the emotions, and just see where your contemplation can take you. The idea here is not necessarily to find a solution. If we have that sort of goal in mind, sometimes we'll become disappointed because we aren't able to find a solution right away. But if you enter contemplation or active imagination more with the goal of I'm just going to reflect and see what comes up, you're going to be more likely to receive something that is useful to you. You tend to be more receptive, like I mentioned, around this time. A lot of it has to do with that, kind of slight thinning of the veils. Um, and also because during this time you may receive more messages from guides, from ancestors. So you can even call upon them when you're doing contemplation. You can call upon them and ask them for their advice. What do you think about the direction that I'm headed? What do you think about this thing I'm thinking about or this problem I have? And then just listen for those answers. And we will be having an episode soon on signs and synchronicities, which is one way that a lot of our guides and our ancestors speak to us. So if you are having trouble understanding how to receive messages, that will be a really great episode for you. That's coming up next week. Okay, so another thing that we can do during the dark moon is meditation. It's a lot like contemplation, but it tends to be a little more open-ended. So when we're doing contemplation, it's usually like we bring a problem, we bring a question, we bring an issue to the kind of the session, right, that we're doing. Whereas in meditation, we're more in sort of this openness, even if we're doing a guided meditation. So this would be a good time to do like guided visualizations down into the underworld, guided visualizations to meet your shadow, guided visualizations to meet some of the darker gods and goddesses. This would be a great time for that. Now, I do want to just pause for a moment and clear up any confusion too about like the underworld, because sometimes people, especially if people are coming from a Judeo-Christian background, and they haven't quite shaken off all of those teachings, they think that the underworld is evil. Evil, witchcraft, black magic, bad stuff. So I get these messages all the time from people asking me about this, so that's why I always like to clear up this misconception. So there's nothing in any way evil about the underworld, and a lot of times the people's fears are simply coming from the fears of the unknown. In shadow work, the underworld is our unconscious. So when you go down into the underworld in these meditations, you are actually going down into your unconscious mind, which is where your shadow exists, which is where you're going to learn all this stuff about yourself, right? That it's going to allow you to find wholeness. So, the shadow itself is not evil. It's the rejected parts of the self that, for whatever reason, they've been rejected most of the time from childhood because of things that people told us, feelings that we had that are natural for all people to have, like anger, right? And rage and judgment. And these are all like natural and normal feelings. But we are told that society does not accept them, jealousy, things like that. And in many of the Judeo-Christian religions, you're told to like sort of like snuff those out, or bad, right? Jesus will take away all your bad things, right? If you believe in Jesus, and all of your bad qualities. And that is where the pathway goes really far away from what's going to be healing to people, because it's not about resisting those parts of ourselves that we heal. It's through facing them, acknowledging them, and trying to trace them back to where they came from. So the shadow is only dangerous to people who are afraid of the power that you can have when you are able to merge your shadow with your, kind of with your conscious self. So this is not an episode on shadow work, so I'm going to be mindful of time and keep on moving here. But we do have a really good shadow work workshop coming up in about a month before we open our shadow work membership, Shadow Seekers. And you can also look on the YouTube channel. You can find a lot of episodes about shadow work there. Okay, so the next idea for the dark moon is releasing and letting go rituals. So this to me is one of my favorite parts of the dark moon. During this time, you have the ability to let go of really anything that is plaguing you, whether that is an energetic blockage of some kind, whether that's an emotional issue, a mental issue of like limiting beliefs or thoughts like that. This is the time when you can let go of the things that you do not want to take with you into the next cycle. So here's where I'm going to give you an example of my personal practice that I do every dark moon, and I usually will only not do it if I'm ill or something like that, or there's just no means to do it. Otherwise, I kind of feel off if I don't do this. I feel like I'm sort of like I'm taking that stagnant energy with me into the next cycle, and then I tend to find that the next cycle doesn't go quite as well for me as I would like. So during my practice, I do a seated ritual. I light some candles around me. I call in my own personal deities. So in my case, my patron is Ganesha. And then if it's a full moon, I usually call Lakshmi. And if it's a dark moon, I call Kali. And so on a dark moon, I would call Kali, and I will call Ganesha. From there, what I usually do is I spend some time, in sort of contemplation with the deities. I chant some of their mantras, which is a way that you can evoke them. and spend some time. And that's also would be considered an offering. I tend to sing to them, I leave them offerings. And then from there, I move into sort of the bulk of my practice. So for this, I take a piece of paper, and I usually take a full, like, sized loose leaf paper like this. And I write as quickly as I can, sort of stream of consciousness, all the things that I would like to let go of. And I let myself be guided from one thought to the next thought. And sometimes it's every month it can be the same thing over and over, because many of these things that we're trying to let go of are big. They're big issues that aren't just simply going away with the snap of a finger, and they can take multiple cycles. So if I notice that an issue is still kind of carrying through one cycle to the next, it's going to be on my piece of paper. So I'll write down, I release my fear about this, I release this, I release my judgment, I release my, and I let go of all the things that I want to let go of. I release the energetic blockages in my body, and I just allow myself to write. And honestly, if there isn't enough to write on the piece of paper, and I would just continue writing, I release, I release, I release, I release, until you've filled the whole piece of paper up. And then from there, what I do is I usually put some oil on it, and I have some dark moon oil, so I put that on it, and then I have a cauldron. I light the paper and I burn it. If you don't want to burn inside, you can always burn outside. If you don't want to burn at all, you can rip it apart. That is a really good way to sort of destroy it. The idea is that you're destroying it because we're releasing. And then from there, we kind of forget about it. Like, we don't want to dwell on it. Did it really work? We want to just let it go. Just like most spell work, we just want to let go once the intention has been sent out to the universe. And then from there, I usually do some divination and perhaps other things. I might work with a pendulum. That would be the space where, like, my practice might be a little different depending on where I am. And then eventually I release the deities and open the release the elements and open the circle and everything. And so that is the practice that I do every single cycle at the dark moon. So I'll be doing that tomorrow night. So you are welcome to take any part of that, adapt that to your own, and try it out and see how it works. But it's very powerful. I always feel it's very freeing to feel that way. It is a general releasing ritual. We're going to talk now about cord cutting and specific banishings. But that one I'm talking about would be like that's just a general releasing for the cycle. Okay, let me just pause and see if there's anything in the chat. I see Tracy is also here. Mary Meet. Cindy said she's a preacher's kid and she got told constantly that she was playing with hellfire because of her shadow work. She gets told constantly. Yeah, exactly. So people will say that when they don't have the first clue as to what shadow work is usually is and the important thing is that we know that it's not. But to the outside world, honestly, things that are unknown, things that can that can make people more powerful. I think shadow work makes people more powerful. It makes your magic more powerful because you're unburdening yourself of, like, energy. Otherwise, that's kind of dragging you down. But those are the things that people are going to be afraid of, right? I mean, I've talked about this before, but there was like an episode of the wife swap or something like that I happened to see once, where there was a guy who was talking about how psychology was of the devil. So, I mean, it's like psychology, the process of, like, going to a psychologist will make you a stronger person, right? A more functioning person, but it will also make you more powerful. And so sometimes people are afraid of that. As Tom had said, more accurate is the idea that you're getting to know yourself as your creator made you, accepting all of you instead of just the parts that society says are best. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Cersei said, could you share the chant you use for Ganesha? Absolutely. I'll say it now, and then afterwards I'll type it into the chat. So it is Om Gum Ganapataye Namaha. Om Gum Ganapataye Namaha. And then I will type the spelling and everything in. But yeah, that's the one I use. And then I actually set that to music as well. So I chant it over and over. I usually use like mala beads, and then I sing it to him as a offering. Okay, so let's keep going. So let's talk about cord cuttings. So cord cuttings and banishings are ways that you can specifically let go. It's a releasing that is more specific to a person or to a place or to a type of energy. So there are multiple ways to do cord cuttings, and there is a lot of disagreement as to how to do one. So I'm going to tell you how I do it. I am a witch who's practiced for 30 years, picked up like all the classic books back in the 90s and early 2000s, and this is how I learned to do it. But I understand that on TikTok and places they're telling people that this is actually binding. I will explain to you why I think it is not. But you are free to do a cord cutting in any way you want to. Whatever way feels right to you is the best way you should do it. So typically in a cord cutting, we want to cut the cord. It's considered sympathetic magic. So what some people will do is they will take 2 candles. They will connect them with a ribbon or a cord. They will light the 2 candles, and as they burn down, eventually the cord severs. And that is considered a cord cutting. Now, that is the particular spell that some people will say is a binding spell. I don't know what practice that comes from. That must come from some tradition, but it's not in the tradition I learned. And from a perspective of sympathetic magic, it's hard for me to understand how cutting the cord is considered binding. So the only thing I can think of is because you tied the 2 candles together in the first place, they may think that that feels more like a binding. But to me, you are already connected to that person anyway, right? So that's why you're severing the connection between them. And then the burning of the cord is the severance. That is the sympathetic magic. But if you are uncertain about that and you don't want, you're worried about it, my biggest issue is that if people feel like worried about something, they're worried, oh, am I actually going to bind myself to the person? Then I wouldn't do it. There's other ways to do cord cuttings. One of the ways I have done is you actually like tie a ribbon around your waist and have it sort of like come off of you, and then you just sever it. Or you could just take a ribbon and you just cut it in half. It's all sympathetic magic. So you need to do something where we are going to cut it, right? Now, there's also ways to do cord cuttings that aren't actually using physical items. You can actually do a cord cutting mentally. And this is a way that my friend and I, back when we were in our like late 20s, she had a boyfriend who was really abusive, and we had a restraining order against him, and he was still showing up and sleeping in our stairwell and crazy stuff like that. And so we would do like mental cord cuttings. And so we would go into circle and we would do meditations, and then we would see like her and him connected with this cord, and then we would watch ourselves sever it. So there's lots of different ways that you can do it. You don't necessarily have to use props in order to do one. Not and so as far as cord cuttings go too, it doesn't have to be about people. You can do a cord cutting to separate yourself from people, but you can also do a cord cutting to separate yourself from bad habits that you have, or from places, maybe a job site that you don't want a connection to anymore, a place that you visited that had a lot of negative energy and maybe you feel you carried some of it home. You can do a cord cutting with that as well. Now, a banishing ritual is sort of a step up from the cord cutting. I think that it's going to have a very similar outcome to it, but what I would suggest is if you are like, let's say that you are doing something where you want to kind of separate yourself energetically from a person, for example, like the father of your or mother of your child or something like that. It's not necessarily going to be possible all the time to do a full-on banishing, because you still have this connection. If that person has to stay in your life, you don't want to do a full-on banishing. But there are times, and in which case you would probably want to do a cord cutting. You would sever like your energetic connection. You would probably also set an intention of having boundaries so that your connection only becomes like a safe one, that involves your child. But if there is a person that you absolutely want out of your life for good and never want them anywhere near you, the banishing could be a good thing for you to do. It can sever the energetic connection. It will also sever the physical connection as well. But like I mentioned, they are very, very powerful. So if you need to be in contact with that person, you just want to be a little bit careful. Now, if you want to do a simple banishing spell, here's one for you. You will get a black candle. Black candles are very good for much work at the dark moon. You will carve the person's name into the candle. You can put symbols or sigils in the candle if you want to make a sigil or something like that. And then you set the intention of banishing. And then from there, you can even like visualize like that, like a force field being built around you, and that person not inside of it. And then you light the candle, you let it burn all the way down. But that can be a very, very powerful, even though very simple, it can be a very powerful banishing spell. Other things that you can do during the new moon or during the dark moon is to work with your intention or psychic or intuition or psychic development. This is a great time for doing third eye exercises and third eye meditations. It's also a good time for you to kind of try out the synchronicity exercise. So, I'm actually in 2 weeks, we're doing a whole episode on intuition. So I'm going to just briefly mention this now in the interest of time, and then just know we're going to do a whole entire episode where I'm going to talk about third eye exercises. I'm going to talk about the synchronicity exercise. I do think that when it comes to intuition, this is a very good time of the cycle to pay attention to your dreams. Pay attention to your daydreams as well. Pay attention to those moments as you're falling asleep. Because, as mentioned earlier, with that slight thinning of the veils, it is easier for things to move from the unconscious into the conscious, and dreams is one place that can happen. Um, Other things that you can do at a dark moon: yin yoga and restorative yoga, or like very relaxing practices like that. So yin yoga is a type of yoga that is not what you typically think of when you think of yoga. There's not much movement in it at all. Most of the time you're laying down in a very comfortable position, which you hold for quite a period of time. During that time, your physical body begins to relax, and that allows your energetic body to also relax. So it is a good way for you to release stuck and stagnant energy in your body. A lot of times we carry it in the hips, we carry it in the belly, we carry it around the heart and the shoulders, and so you just get into these kind of poses, and you hold them 5-10 minutes sometimes. And it's not unusual for people to kind of spontaneously start to cry during it, and you don't even have to understand what you're releasing. It can be energy you're holding in your hip from when you were like 5 years old, and it doesn't matter where it comes from. What matters is that the energy is being released. So this is actually one of my very favorite activities for the dark moon. Those of you who are in our Shadow Seekers membership, we are going to be doing a really good yin yoga practice tomorrow for our yoga class. But it's just a great time of the lunar cycle to really allow yourself to relax and see what you can. Again, it's another way of letting go. Working with the darker deities, this is also a great time of the lunar cycle to work with them. So I mentioned earlier I work with Kali at the dark moon. So other deities, darker deities or deities of the underworld include like Kali, Inanna, her sister Ereshkigal, Lilith, Hecate, Persephone, Nyx, the Morrigan. These are not the only ones, of course, that you can work with, but these are good ones that are pretty accessible for a lot of people. And then finally, just this idea of resting and restoring. So we talked a little bit about that with the yin yoga. It can be very restful, but you may find at this time of the lunar cycle that you are more tired than usual. This is why I teach yoga in the way I do. It's just because people's energy changes and shifts throughout the lunar cycle. We're not the same person every single day of the lunar cycle. And so our lifestyle shouldn't be the same every single day of the lunar cycle. Unfortunately, our world doesn't provide us that kind of space, though. So we're in that go, go, go world that says you don't have time to slow down, you don't have time to check out a little bit here. But if you can make a concerted effort, if you need more sleep at this time, try to gift that to yourself. If you need to be alone, gift that to yourself, especially if you're feeling like I want to turn inward. And you notice it's right around the dark moon. You don't have to push yourself to say yes to people or accept invitations if you actually feel more reflective and like turning inward. This is also a great time to prioritize your self-care because a lot of emotions can come up around this time of the lunar cycle. So I am going to, that's all we have for tonight's episode, but I do have quite a few questions that were left for me. So I'm going to dive in and start answering those now. If you're with us live, you can answer some or ask some questions too. You can put them in the chat, anything related to shadow work, energy work, witchcraft. It doesn't have to be about the dark moon. Okay, and then if you are with us in replay, you can feel free to also leave your questions and I'll go back and answer those later. So I'm going to start with a couple of questions from Andrea, and she said her first one is about using psalms during spell work. So she said, what is your opinion on using psalms in your spell work and rituals? She said she's been seeing people post how they use specific psalms for specific spell work. Okay, so a couple of thoughts on this. I think that I'm not going to say many, I'm going to say some people choose to use these, especially if they have a deep connection to the Bible. So if you have a deep connection to the Bible, I think that using psalms makes a lot of sense. Other witches who had a connection to the Bible but have left that religion may recoil at the idea of using biblical passages in spell work. It all depends on who you are. For me personally, I see the value in it because they are like ancient hymns that were written. So like the Sanskrit mantras that I use those to powerfully connect to deities by using old words. I think that there can be similar value in using the Psalms. But again, it's going to depend on who you are. And it's going to depend on where you are in your sort of transition into witchcraft. And if you carry resentment for Christianity, then I think that it could be it might not be in your best interest to use psalms because you're bringing in things that you already have like a negative connotation with. But instead, perhaps you've left the Christianity, but you still love those parts of the Bible, absolutely use them. I do think that for somebody who has no connection to the Bible, has really never had any connection to Christianity, don't feel that you would have to use psalms just because other people are using them. It's just they're using them because they have a connection. But I did look this up before the episode. And I saw some people on Reddit talking about it. There was a woman saying that she likes to use Psalm 65 for luck. She uses Psalm 112 for money. She said she uses a passage in Corinthians for like love magic. So just as there are so many different kinds of witches, there are so many different ways that we can practice, and that is absolutely a valid way. So Andrea also had a second question where she's asking about connecting to spirit guides. So earlier she had asked what episode. There was an episode about connecting to spirit guides. And I'm going to go ahead and drop that in the chat, and it will be in the comments for those watching on YouTube later. So that is the episode on spirit guides that I did, I think it was about like 5 months ago. But just giving like a little bit of advice on connecting to spirit guides. Probably the most important thing for people who want to connect to spirit guides is to try to figure out how their guides talk to them. That is going to be the hardest, that's going to be the most challenging probably aspect of the whole process. And it can take a lot of time to do it. So I'm just going to tell you a story about a guide of mine named Ralph, no less, who I didn't even know about until 2 years ago when I had my aura read. And the woman who read my aura, it was very clear that she was not just reading the picture, she was also sort of a clairvoyant and like a psychic medium. And she was all of a sudden channeling this guide that she could see in the aura photograph. And she said he's a big burly guy, kind of ancient Tibetan guy. His name is Ralph. He's been with you since you incarnated here, and he wants to know why you won't listen to him. And I said, and I was recording this so I wouldn't forget anything she said during that little reading. And I said, you can hear me say in the video, oh, I didn't even know he was there. And she said, yeah, that's the problem. And so, for many of us, there are these guides who are around us and they are constantly trying to communicate to us, but we are ignorant of their presence because we are ignorant of how they communicate. So, one of the things I did with Ralph, once I sort of understood that he was there, is I started to talk to him and I would address him as Ralph, and I would say in my mind, are you there? Or like, one of the things she said to me is that he helped me a lot while I was driving because he wanted to know why I drive so distracted all the time, and that he had helped me out in a lot of situations. And so I just started to talk to him. I would talk to him just while I was walking. I would talk to him when I was doing like my oracle or tarot readings or when I was doing pendulum. And I just like you would talk to a friend. So if you don't, like for me, at least I knew his name. I sort of even had an image that she had described him as. If you don't have that, you can always just talk. Are you there? Can you hear me? And I will tell you, it's like you don't expect this immediate, yes, I'm there. Like, that's not how Ralph communicates with me. It's more of a subtle knowing. And, um, and so we what you will find is you watch that episode, the episode 99 that I put in the chat, and I'll give you some more sort of ways that you can try to connect. But I think that like different ways that you can connect to a spirit guide is through automatic writing, through the pendulum, through tarot or oracle cards, through animals or nature, through candle gazing. Everybody is going to be different when it comes to which method works for them. So set the intention, kind of start talking to your guide. Say, I'm here, I'm receiving, I'm receptive, I want to hear you. And then try out a couple of these methods and see what responses you get. Sometimes the responses of the guides being near are not in any way what you're expecting. Like just the other night, I was like, it was so late at night. I had this really early day I had to be up for, and I was trying to pack my bag, and I couldn't find the sunscreen. And so I just say, Ralph, I'm trying to find the sunscreen. And if I wasn't paying attention enough, I wouldn't have caught this. But my cat Loki went crazy all of a sudden, and he jumped up crazily and he knocked the sunscreen off of a table where it was hidden under all this stuff. So, so sometimes our guides will speak to us and communicate with us in very, very subtle ways that we might otherwise miss. I think that at the end of the day, my best advice when it comes to connecting to guides is frequent intention setting, but also working on your self-doubt. Now, there's a question that is coming about intuition. It also has a similar answer. So I'm gonna save that thought about self-doubt, and I'm gonna talk about it in the next question, okay? Because it applies to both of these. So this question is from Chris, and she's asking about intuition. How do you know if it's intuition or not? So great question. First off, there is a new episode coming out in 2 weeks on March 11th. It's all about intuition. So I'm just going to briefly talk about a few things here, some of the most important items or things to consider when it comes to intuition, and then we got a whole hour-long episode about it in 2 weeks. I think that the three biggest challenges people have when it comes to intuition are self-doubt, fear, and energetic blockages. Most of the time, those blockages are in the first, second, and the third chakras, usually in the lower ones, a lot of times less in the third eye. What people will often find is when they are able to work through the blockages of the lower three chakras, immediately the third eye sort of balances itself. Or another way of looking at it is you've got all these energetic blockages. You pull energy up from the earth up into your root chakra. This is sort of how you take energy into your body. If you have a lot of blockages in the lower part of your body, the energy doesn't effectively flow up into the upper part of your body where all of your spiritual centers are, which means you don't have the right amount of energy reaching your third eye. This is where kind of the lower part of the body can become the starting place for people who are challenged when it comes to their intuition. Another tip for intuition, and like I said, I will go through all of this in like a lot of detail in the episode in 2 weeks, but it's learning where in your body your intuition is felt. Some people feel it viscerally in their body. If they can if they can like hone in on that area, that can be really important for them, because it can help them identify, if they know they feel intuition sort of in the heart or in the belly or in a different place. I've heard people like say they feel it like on the back of their hand. That will help them key into whether or not it really is intuition. Another thing is to look into, it just occurred to me, I think I put, oh yeah, there's another episode. So my next thought for intuition is learning which of the clair senses is your primary one. That can be a big one because we're not all necessarily clairvoyant. For me, I'm claircognizant, and as soon as I understood that, it was a big game changer for me. That's where my intuition comes from. So a lot of times when messages come in and they're coming in through different senses, I'm able to understand that's not my intuition. That's fear, that's anxieties, different things. But if it's thoughts, I understand that that's more my intuition. So I'm just dropping in the chat an episode on the clair senses. So you can kind of watch that if you feel like it, and that can give you some insight into perhaps which of the clairs is your main one. That can help you hone into where your intuitive messages will come from. And then a final thought, and then I will go into more detail on this in 2 weeks, is intuition is usually not nagging, derogatory, or mean. It's not like a mean friend. So if that's the kind of thoughts you have, that tends to be more anxiety. And if you do have a lot of anxiety, it can be important to learn how to manage that first, because really being truly intuitive means you need to be very relaxed. That's usually a key to really tapping into intuition. And if you're in sort of a state of anxiety, you're not fully relaxed. So learning how to relax, whether that means yoga, meditation, breath work, things like that, seeing a therapist, medication, herbal things like passion flower or lemon balm are very good for relaxing. But learning how to relax can be very helpful. And then, of course, working with your self-belief. It's the biggest challenge for most people, and it persists with many of us even when we work through it. So learning how to trust yourself is going to be the number one thing, because if you are constantly questioning your intuition, it's going to be harder to be able to improve it, right? So we will talk in great detail about how to do all of this in that episode. But for those of you who do feel like self-doubt is what plagues you when it comes to your intuition, connecting to spirit guides, then it would be worthwhile to try to work with your self-belief. I'll be sharing a self-belief exercise during that episode in 2 weeks, but my best advice is work with your solar plexus, and that's going to help you in so many ways in your life, is just focus on that. Just a side note, working with chakras is a long-term process. It is not a short-term one. This kind of work, it's not the kind of work that just magically happens in one instant. I've heard people, in fact, I was at this like witchcraft store once where a woman was saying she wanted somebody to pay her like $400 for a session, and she said, you can do shadow work and you can do all this stuff, but I can just remove all of that with this $400 session. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't have the $400 to find out, but I typically find when it comes to this kind of work, it's our hard work that is the most meaningful. It's not usually something that somebody can wave a magic wand and have it be gone, or have it improve. So like anything that is very important to us, it comes with great effort, and working with our chakras it's a long-term process. So you work with these lower 3 chakras, you see improvements, you continue to work with them, you see more improvements, you continue to work with them, and eventually you start to notice that things have really shifted and changed for you. Okay, so I hope that helps. Sharon also has kind of a related question because she's talking about ancestors. So she said, I'm trying to work with my ancestors. She said, I've got an herb pouch under my pillow with intention herbs for connecting. But she's looking for some advice. So she says, I'm not sure what to expect or imagine. Will they come in dreams, or will I just feel them when they're needed? Are there signs or something? Okay, so I think, first of all, the herb pouch is a great place to begin because intention setting is always the first step. So you can't really start with the process of connecting to ancestors or guides or anything for that matter if we don't start with the intention. So you've already set the intention. Now, I think that especially because you place the pouch under your pillow, you are connecting to them through your sleep, that you're sort of setting the intention that you will connect to them through your sleep. So I would look for answers in dreams, insight messages that come through dreams. But it's not just the dreams, because then I'll talk about like, um, let's say a person has trouble remembering their dreams or can't remember them on every night. The insight can still come to us even if you don't remember your dreams. So if you do remember your dreams, immediately write them down upon waking, put paper next to the bed, and you just got to write it down. But if you don't remember your dreams, at least write down the first thought that pops into your head when you wake up, or the first emotion that you feel when you wake up. If there's a song in your head, all of that is going to be good data to write down to help to begin to decipher the messages that are coming through. Now, but another place that you can kind of, because you're already in bed, another place you may receive the messages is through the hypnagogic state, which is the state in between waking and sleeping. So as you are starting to fall asleep and drifting off, but you're still kind of conscious, it's like you have one foot in the unconscious and one foot in the conscious. That is also where messages from the ancestors could come through, especially because you're setting the intention that you want to receive insight kind of while you're in bed. So pay, like I said, pay attention to the dreams. Other ideas too, just to sort of put some like icing on the cake, is to set up an ancestor altar or a dedicated space in your house for the ancestors. If you don't have a lot of space, you can even do this on the top of a bookshelf. Just clear it off, put a little like scarf on the top or a piece of cloth or something for a little altar, and then you can set offerings on the ancestor altar. You can put pictures, you can put mementos on there, and just have that sort of be a devotional space in your home for the ancestors. So anything that you can do that's inviting them in will be important here. So I hope that helps. And then Billy asked a good question as well. He said, how come everybody mentions a connection with the feminine goddess, but you hardly ever hear about a connection with their god? Okay, so very good question. I'm going to have my own thoughts on it. Other people may have different thoughts. I did ask Billy if it was specifically in our group, Body, Mind, Witchcraft, or it was just pagan groups in general, and he said just groups in general. So a few thoughts. Number one, I think that in many of these groups, I know this is true in the case of our group, it's about 85% of the group is female, from 80, or identifies as female, so from 80 to 85%. So just naturally, those who identify as female might be more connected to feminine energy and feminine deities. So that could be part of the reason that we see a lot of people talking about the divine feminine in more frequently than we see people talking about the divine masculine. Other groups may not have the same division as ours do. They might be more equally matched between those who identify as male or those who identify as female. That is one thought I have. But another thought that I have is that many of the people who come to the pagan path, and this includes myself, left Christianity for a specific reason. And sometimes that reason is because of just not identifying with the energy of that religion. So I would just tell you, as a little girl, I could not understand where the goddess was. I didn't understand why it was a god. I would start asking questions. Well, it's the woman who gives birth to babies and is the center of life. Why can't, where's the goddess? There is no goddess. And that is, and the way that the church wrote about women was very upsetting to me, and so my break from the church also came with my my beginnings as a feminist, and so for me it was years of just pure goddess worship. There was really, to me, there was no room in my path for a divine masculine, because I was countering the years of conditioning that I had heard and my rage at this sort of like world where the patriarchy and and women are oppressed, and people of color are oppressed, and disadvantaged people are oppressed, and so I was countering that in my practice. Now, as I evolved in my practice, eventually I became Wiccan, and there's very much this space of feminine and masculine in it. In our rituals, we would call both. Today, in many of our rituals, we call both. In my Shadow Seekers rituals, we usually only call one or the other. Most of the time, it is a female deity, but we do work with masculine gods as well. So that's just more like my own kind of personal reason why I feel more connected to the divine feminine than the divine masculine. But I think another thing too is, people are just sad to say, but a lot more of the violence in the world has probably been perpetuated by human males. And so sometimes people are, again, they're resisting that. They turn towards paganism. They begin to find the divine feminine first. There they may stay, and they may never look to enhance their relationship with the divine masculine. But for those who do, it's a very important place for us to be too, because we need, for those who have had, for example, bad things happen to them that were like because of men or things like that, or they have like this bad taste in their mouth because of the male Christian God. It is important for us to figure out how to heal that. And many times that healing comes through the divine masculine, inviting him into our world and starting to connect to him as well. So I think a book that is really fantastic is The Witch's God. It's kind of hard to see with this like gold writing on it. The book is by Janet and Stuart Farrar. This is the companion book to their first book, The Witch's Goddess. I think was the one they wrote first. This is a fantastic book for anybody who wants to dive into exploring the divine masculine. I think another thing I would add with the divine masculine is somebody had asked me the other day about working with goddesses for mother wound and gods for father wound. It's very easy to come up with goddesses for mother wound. It's a little bit harder to come up with gods for father wound because many of the gods have some not so great stories, right? There's rape, there's aggression, there's things like that people are not necessarily wanting that energy when they're trying to work through like father wound stuff, for example. So I recommend like gods like the Dagda, who is very compassionate, very, very, very kind. Odin is another great one for working with father wound stuff. But I mean, these are just some of my thoughts. I'd be interested to hear what other people think, but these are some of the things I've thought about, like why is it that people feel like more connected to the divine feminine, or you see people talking more about the divine feminine in groups. All right, so those are my questions that I had sent to me. So let's see. I got to actually sign off because I got somewhere I got to go soon, but let me see if there's anything in here that okay. There's a lot of comments. I'm just trying to see through, like, where did I leave off here? Cindy said she likes the yoga classes. Tom said, should we find a mantra offering for our deities in the language of their origin, culture, nation? I personally found a lot of things shifted for me when I started using the Sanskrit mantras to call in, my deities I work with from the Hindu pantheon. So I do think there is great power in speaking to them in their language. That being said, it can be challenging sometimes to get the pronunciations right. So you'd have to study them. I started to study Sanskrit a lot, so I would understand how the vowels work. So I would be able to pronounce everything correctly. But I do think there is very great power in being able to connect to them in their language. It's not always going to be possible. Some languages are harder than others to speak. But if you can, it is something something worth looking into. Okay. Kurt's asking some questions about the coven. We'll talk about that at the coven meeting on Sunday. Stephanie is asking about joining the coven. So to join the coven, we have a course called Demystifying Witchcraft, and that is the first step. And that course is actually about to be open to the public in March. It's not too soon from now, or not too long from now. And then that is the first step. Once you take the course, then you will receive an invitation to join the coven if you want to. Not everybody who takes the course joins or is required. It's not a requirement to join, but it is the prerequisite for joining the coven. And that is coming soon. Um, Cindy says she more gazes than speaking to her guides. I was going to mention, yeah, candle gazing is another really great way to talk to guides. She said there are times when she feels overwhelmed and tired or anxious. She loses faith in her guide. Lately, when I feel this way, he comes to me in my dreams. Yeah, so sometimes, like, I know Cindy has talked over a long time about doing a lot of candle gazing to connect. But sometimes that sort of like that one method that we prefer starts to shift. And then he will become, the guide will come to us, or her God will come to her in a different way, like in her dreams. Um, okay. Tom said the two deities who seem right for him are feminine Hecate and then the masculine Anubis. Yeah, totally, totally. Okay, so I'm going to take off because I should have left 5 minutes ago, and I'm trying to get to an event on time. That's why we're doing this early today. If I missed anything, because there's a lot in the chat, and sometimes I miss somebody's question, I never do it on purpose. But I will go back later tonight, and I'm going to read through, make sure I didn't miss anything. Anything I didn't answer during the episode, I will answer in the chat. And if you're watching this back in replay, you can also leave questions and I'll go back and I'll answer those as well. Let me just tell you a little bit about what is coming up. So next week on 3/4, we have an episode on signs and synchronicities. Right now, I'm redoing some of our very oldest episodes and improving them. Then on 3/11, we're doing an episode on intuition. And then on 3/18, we'll be close to the equinox. So we'll do the episode on Ostara and the spring equinox. And then, like I mentioned, our Demystifying Witchcraft course is coming out sometime in March. And then our Shadow Seekers membership will be reopening probably sometime in April. So the course is very good for those who want to learn the foundations of witchcraft, how to cast a circle, call the quarters, work with deities, do spell work, timing, magical timing, things like that. The membership is good for those who want to sort of take their spiritual practice to the next level, learn how to break through energetic and emotional blockages so they can improve their intuition, connection to the guides. And it tends to take your magical practice, like it improves your spell work, things like that. So together, the course and the membership go hand in hand, but they both kind of serve different purposes. So anyway, more information will be coming up about that very soon. All right, so if you like what you hear, leave a thumbs up or a heart somewhere in the video. That helps us get it to the feed of more people. If you are watching back in YouTube, or even if you're not watching back in YouTube, on YouTube, make sure to subscribe to our channel, Body, Mind, Witchcraft, and that way you will not miss a single episode in the future. All right, until next time, blessed be.